take a long, slow breath and allow your consciousness to descend from the noise of the mind into the vast, quiet sanctuary of the heart. You are entering a space of profound spiritual gravity. We are moving beyond the surface-level understanding of good and evil, beyond the frantic imagery of battle, and into the sober golden light of spiritual truth. There is a specific frequency to a soul that has been refined in the furnace of isolation, a soul we call the chosen one. This is not a title of vanity, but a description of a vessel that has been hollowed out by life's trials so that it may hold a greater volume of divine light. For years, you may have felt like a target. You felt the whispers of doubt, the sting of betrayal, and the heavy shroud of unexplained sadness. You felt as though an unseen adversary was constantly testing the limits of your endurance, pushing you toward the breaking point where you might finally renounce your goodness and succumb to the bitterness of the world. But something miraculous happened in the depths of your private struggle. Instead of breaking, you became translucent. Instead of hardening, you became soft yet indestructible, like water that can wear away the hardest stone. This script of your life reached a climax that the shadows did not anticipate. In the spiritual realm, power is not measured by force, but by the absence of resistance. When you finally stopped fighting the darkness with its own weapons, anger, fear, and retaliation, and began to face it with the terrifying stillness of a soul that knows its origin, the hierarchy of the unseen world shifted. The adversary, the egoic shadow that has pursued you for lifetimes, found itself standing before a mirror it could not endure. It saw in you the very image of the Creator, polished and bright. In that moment of recognition, the darkness did not just flee, it collapsed, it knelt. It was a moment of such profound spiritual symmetry that even the heavens stood in a state of holy, silent shock, witnessing the beauty of a human spirit that refused to be anything less than divine. Let us now explore the 7 pillars of this victory, moving slowly through the architecture of your soul. Point 1, the dissolution of the reactive self. To understand why the adversary has knelt, one must first understand the true nature of his power, because it was never rooted in strength of its own, but in your former willingness to react. Darkness does not generate energy, it harvests it. It survives as a parasite, feeding on agitation, fear, outrage, and the unconscious impulse to explain, defend, or resist. For much of your life, you were trained, subtly and relentlessly, to become a reactive being. When the world pushed, you pushed back. When your name was questioned, your pulse quickened with the urge to correct the narrative. When you were dismissed or excluded, a quiet ache settled into your chest, convincing you that belonging had to be earned through effort or approval. These reactions were not weaknesses of character. They were openings. They were the handles by which the adversary moved you, redirected your focus, drained your energy, and kept you locked in endless internal motion. Every emotional surge became proof of access. Every explanation became permission. Every defense became nourishment. But something irreversible has occurred within you. The first unmistakable sign of your ultimate victory is not noise, conquest, or visible triumph. It is the emergence of a deep psychological stillness. This stillness did not arrive suddenly. It was forged through exhaustion, repetition, and the quiet realization that reaction never delivered the peace it promised. You have reached a point where you now observe attempts to provoke you with a detached clarity, as if you are watching a distant storm from inside a warm, glass-walled room. You see the lightning of accusation. You hear the thunder of anger, manipulation, or chaos. Yet you remain dry, centered, untouched. The storm may rage, but it no longer defines the climate of your inner world. This is the dissolution of the reactive self, the version of you that once mistook urgency for importance and emotion for truth. In its place stands a sober awareness, calm and unshakable, where you recognize that your inner peace is sovereign territory. No one enters it without consent. No narrative breaches it without invitation. No provocation survives without participation. When the adversary senses this shift, confusion sets in. His most refined tactics, guilt, urgency, shame, fear, and bait, produce nothing. No spark, no recoil, no engagement. And in that moment, he is stripped of purpose. There is a terrifying power in a person who cannot be provoked, because such a person cannot be controlled, redirected, or depleted. Silence becomes a wall. Stillness becomes a shield. By refusing to react, you have not fought the shadow, you have starved it. And starved things weaken quietly. The adversary kneels not because he has been attacked, but because he has been rendered irrelevant. He gazes at your composure and understands that you are no longer a puppet of circumstances, no longer vibrating at the frequency of external events, but standing as the master of your own internal rhythm. This is the moment dominance quietly changes hands. Your stillness becomes a gravitational force. It stabilizes rooms, it disarms chaos, it exposes manipulation without naming it. Low vibrational energies cannot maintain their form in its presence because peace reveals what noise was hiding. This is why the darkness retreats. This is why it kneels, not in defeat by force, but in surrender to a consciousness it can no longer reach. Point 2, the mastery of spiritual gravity and the quiet. No. The second pillar is the development of what we might call spiritual gravity, a quiet but undeniable force that forms when a soul has been refined through discipline, stillness, and truth. In the physical world, objects with great mass bend space around them. They do not chase, they do not beg, they simply are, and everything else must adjust in response. In the spiritual world, the same law applies. A soul that has spent long seasons in meditation, in prayer, in solitude, and in sober contemplation of reality, gains a kind of inner weight. This weight is not heaviness or burden, it is density, presence, and rootedness. You have lived through enough disillusionment, enough testing, enough silence to gather your scattered energy back into yourself. Where you once leaked attention, emotion, and explanation, you now hold your life force intact. This is why the world no longer pushes you around. This is why chaos no longer hooks into you. This spiritual gravity expresses itself in everyday life through what can only be described as the power of the quiet no. In earlier seasons, your no may have been loud, apologetic, or defensive. You explained yourself too much. You justified your boundaries. You felt guilt for choosing peace over obligation, truth over harmony, solitude over dysfunction. Your no was still entangled with fear of rejection and the need for approval. But now something has changed at a fundamental level. Your no is no longer an argument. It is a condition of reality. It is spoken without words, without tension, without emotional charge. It stands like an immovable wall of light. When an old temptation returns, it does not provoke debate. It dissolves on contact. When a manipulative person approaches, they feel something different in your presence. There's a density in your field, a grounded certainty that offers no entry point. You do not need to raise your voice, explain your reasons, or defend your choices. The frequency of your boundary speaks for you. This mastery over your own space is not arrogance, it is stewardship. It is the recognition that your energy, your time, and your attention are sacred resources entrusted to you, not commodities to be negotiated away. The adversarial forces of life thrive on the diluted soul, the one spread thin across too many expectations, obligations, and false identities. A diluted soul is easy to influence, easy to exhaust, easy to bend. But you have gathered yourself back into your center. You are no longer fragmented. You have become a concentrated point of focus, aligned with truth rather than approval. This is why the quiet no carries such authority. It is not resistance, it is certainty. There's no internal debate for an external force to exploit. There's no crack for doubt to enter. Even opposition recognizes this and withdraws, because nothing terrifies manipulation more than a soul that is whole. In spiritual terms, this is why it is said that the adversary kneels before the quiet no, not because of drama or confrontation, but because absolute certainty leaves no leverage. You have become a locked garden, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Only that which carries the same light, the same integrity, is given the key. And even God is moved by this state because it reveals a soul that has finally learned the value of the life force it was given. It shows maturity, discernment, and trust. You're no longer asking permission to exist as you are. You are standing fully present, fully gathered, and fully aligned. This is spiritual gravity, and once it is formed, nothing in the world can pretend it does not feel its pull. Point 3, the recognition of divine fact over emotional fiction. We must understand that the adversary is primarily a narrator of fiction, not a force of power, but a voice of distortion that survives only through repetition and emotional manipulation. He does not create reality, he edits perception. He weaves stories of not enough, stories of too late, and stories of unworthy, stitching them together until they feel familiar, until they feel personal, until they masquerade as your own inner voice. For years you mistook these stories for your thoughts, believing that the anxiety, the regret, and the constant mental rehearsals of failure were evidence of truth rather than symptoms of conditioning. You lived in a psychological landscape of what if and if only, replaying alternate timelines that never existed, surrendering energy to imagined futures and rewritten pasts. But the third sign of your victory is subtle, profound, and irreversible, your transition into the realm of spiritual fact. A spiritual fact is not an affirmation you repeat to feel better, nor is it a belief that fluctuates with mood or circumstance. A spiritual fact is a truth that remains intact regardless of how you feel, regardless of what your bank account looks like, and regardless of who applauds you or who doubts you. A spiritual fact is that you are an eternal being having a temporary human experience, not a fragile body scrambling for meaning, but consciousness itself passing through form. A spiritual fact is that you are loved by the source of all existence, with an intensity so vast, so total, that if your nervous system perceived it without filtration, it would overwhelm your physical form in an instant. As a chosen one, you have begun to reorganize your inner hierarchy, placing these facts above emotions, above thoughts, and above circumstance. This does not mean you no longer feel sadness, fear, or uncertainty. It means you no longer identify as them. When a wave of sadness or anxiety hits you, You do not collapse into it and declare, "I am sad," or "I am anxious," as if the wave defines the ocean. Instead, you say, "I am experiencing a wave of sadness, but I am the ocean beneath it," and in that moment, sovereignty is restored. This distinction, quiet and internal, is what causes the adversary to kneel, because his primary weapon has always been the lie of identity. He survives by convincing you that passing states are permanent truths, that temporary sensations are who you are. When he encounters a soul that has become a connoisseur of truth, a soul trained to separate experience from essence, his weapon breaks in his hand. There is nothing to hook into, nothing to amplify, and nothing to distort. You have become sober in the highest sense, undrunk by the illusions of the world, no longer intoxicated by fear narratives, social comparison, or emotional exaggeration. You see things as they are, not as you fear them to be, not as the wounded mind once projected them. This clarity is not loud or dramatic. It is calm, precise, and unshakable. It is a light so bright that it burns the eyes of the shadow, not through force, but through exposure. Even the angels marvel at this state, for a human who can see through the veil while still wearing the flesh is rare, disciplined, and immensely valuable. You have not escaped the world. You have mastered your relationship to it. You walk among illusions without being governed by them, anchored in spiritual fact and steady in truth, and this is why your victory is already sealed. Point 4, the alchemy of the broken vessel and radical gratitude. There is a secret known only to those who have walked the narrow, refining path of the chosen. The most powerful light does not emerge from perfection, but from the cracks of a broken heart that refuse to harden. You have lived through seasons where your inner world collapsed in silence, moments when dreams dissolved, relationships fractured, and certainty vanished, leaving you staring into an unfamiliar emptiness. It felt as though the very framework of your life was being dismantled piece by piece. And in those moments, the adversary watched with quiet satisfaction, convinced this was the chapter where your spirit would finally fold under the weight of disappointment. Everything in the natural order suggested despair was the logical response, withdrawal the sensible reaction, and bitterness the justified conclusion. Yet instead of surrendering to the gravity of loss, you made a choice that echoed beyond the visible realm. You chose gratitude, not the comfortable gratitude spoken from abundance, but the raw, disciplined gratitude that rises from the depths when there is nothing left to lean on but God alone. You learned how to inhale thankfulness into places that felt hollow, and how to whisper praise into rooms where hope once lived but no longer answered back. This was not denial, nor was it naivete. It was sober awareness fused with faith, the kind of gratitude that acknowledges the pain without allowing it to become sovereign. In that precise moment, something ancient and irreversible occurred. You initiated a form of spiritual alchemy that few ever access, a transmutation where the dense, heavy energy of loss was converted into the radiant authority of wisdom. Darkness was expected to consume you, but instead it became the furnace that refined you. Gratitude in desolation reverses the natural current of despair. It interrupts the adversary's economy, rendering his strategies ineffective. This is why praise in the dark is intolerable to him. It carries a frequency he cannot counterfeit, a resonance born not of circumstance, but of alignment. It is the sound of a soul that has discovered treasure buried beneath suffering, the realization that nothing endured was wasted, and nothing lost escaped divine accounting. In this frequency, gratitude becomes more than emotion, it becomes governance. It reclaims dominion over inner territory once occupied by fear and resentment, establishing order where chaos sought to reign. Scripture speaks of light shining in darkness, but what is rarely discussed is that this light is often ignited by choice, not comfort. When you gave thanks, heaven did not merely observe, it responded. God is described as being pleased or moved, not because your gratitude surprised his omniscience, but because the elegance of your response mirrored his own nature. Your choice testified that his character had been successfully imprinted within you. Gratitude, then, became a bridge between realms, allowing the miraculous to step quietly into the ordinary, altering outcomes without spectacle. Doors began to open not through force, but through resonance. Restoration approached not as a dramatic reversal, but as a steady reordering of reality around your new frequency. In this space, the chosen one transcends victimhood and steps into co-creation, partnering with God not through control, but through trust. You did not conquer by resisting the pain, you overcame by sanctifying it. And now, what once threatened to destroy you stands as evidence of your authority, proof that gratitude is not a reaction to blessings, but the very mechanism that summons them into being. Point 5. The shadows surrender to the anonymous ego. One of the most difficult and sacred lessons for a chosen one is the quiet, almost imperceptible release of the need to be seen, named, credited, or remembered. In the early stages of awakening, the ego still clings to its identity, still longs to be acknowledged as special, and still wants proof that the suffering meant something in the eyes of others. The ego wants to be the hero of the story. It wants witnesses, recognition, and sometimes even fear. It wants the adversary to know who defeated him, to understand what he lost, and to feel regret. But the deeper you move into alignment, the more you realize that true spiritual authority does not announce itself. It does not need applause, validation, or vindication. It operates quietly, invisibly, and with absolute certainty. You reach a point where the label chosen no longer matters to you at all. You no longer need confirmation from the world, nor do you need those who wounded you to ever understand your value. You stop rehearsing imagined apologies in your mind. You stop fantasizing about being missed, regretted, or chased. The hunger for a public victory dissolves, replaced by a calm, grounded knowing that nothing outside of you can add to or subtract from what you are. In this ego loss, something profound happens. You become spiritually invisible to the lower realms. The forces that once fed on your reactions, your pride, your wounds, and your need to be right, can no longer find you. The adversary searches for the version of you he once knew, the reactive self, the offended self, the ambitious self, the one desperate to prove worth, and finds only stillness. There is no handle left to grab, no identity left to attack, and no emotional charge left to exploit. This is the ultimate kneeling, not because you overpower anything, but because there is no longer a someone to oppose. The bow happens automatically, not out of fear, but out of irrelevance. You have stepped beyond the battlefield altogether. In this state, you no longer act from personal will, egoic desire, or the need to control outcomes. You become a conduit rather than a commander. When you walk, it is the Spirit that walks through you. When you speak, it is truth that moves, unfiltered by insecurity or self-interest. Your presence alone carries authority, not because you assert it, but because nothing in you resists alignment anymore. This compassionate detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. You care deeply, but you are no longer entangled. You love without attachment, serve without identity, and stand firm without needing to dominate. This is the pinnacle of the chosen one's journey, and it is rarely dramatic. It unfolds slowly, quietly, and through repeated inner surrender. It educates you gently, teaching you that your greatest strength is not found in elevation, but in reduction, not in becoming more, but in becoming less. As layers of ego fall away, something luminous remains, pure presence, unburdened and unthreatened. Even the heavens take notice when a soul reaches this stage, because it represents a rare trade, the exchange of an earthly crown for a crown of pure light. This crown cannot be seen, displayed, or admired by the world. It can only be worn by those who have become nothing in the eyes of others, and everything in alignment with the divine. Point 6, the architecture of self-forgiveness and the end of shame. The adversary is known as the accuser, and his influence is not loud or theatrical, but intimate and invasive, most powerfully felt through the quiet, corrosive sensation of shame. That heavy, sickening weight that whispers you have failed beyond repair, that something in you is fundamentally broken, that you are unworthy of grace and forever disqualified from love. For years, perhaps without realizing it, you have walked through life carrying a bag of stones on your back, each stone etched with a memory of a mistake, a moment of weakness, or a decision made in confusion, fear, or desperation. And with every step, the burden grew heavier until it began to feel like your identity rather than your history. The sixth sign that you have made the devil kneel is not found in external victory, public recognition, or dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, almost unnoticeable moment when you finally set that bag down and realize you were never meant to carry it in the first place. In that moment, a profound understanding settles into your spirit. Shame is not truth. It is a psychological and spiritual construct designed to keep the soul contracted, fragmented, and vibrating at its lowest possible frequency. You see clearly that shame does not correct behavior or refine character. It paralyzes growth by trapping you in endless self-punishment. And so you choose something revolutionary in its simplicity. You replace shame with sober, gentle self-forgiveness, not the kind that excuses harm or denies responsibility, but the kind that understands context, immaturity, wounds, and unmet needs. You look back at your younger self, not with disgust or contempt, but with the calm compassion of a wise teacher, observing a struggling student who did not yet have the language, tools, or safety to choose differently. You recognize that what you once labeled as sin was, at its core, a desperate search for love, safety, belonging, or relief, pursued in the wrong places, because you did not yet know where the true source was. This realization does not weaken you. It dignifies your journey and restores coherence to your story. By forgiving yourself, you have done something devastating to the adversary. You have burned his legal documents, shredded his evidence, and revoked his authority to prosecute you in the courtroom of your own mind. He can no longer replay your past with the power to condemn, because the judge within you no longer agrees with the accusation. When you stand in the fullness of your self-acceptance, something subtle but absolute occurs. The shadow must bow, because it can only exist where there is a crack of self-hatred, a fracture of worth, or a hidden belief that love must be earned through perfection. Your wholeness leaves no place for him to stand. This is not a loud triumph. It is a silent, internal revolution that rewires the very nervous system of your faith and changes the spiritual DNA through which you experience life. It is the moment you realize, not intellectually but viscerally, that the Father's love was never conditional, never suspended until you got it right, never withdrawn during your worst moments, and that your status as chosen was never based on flawlessness, moral performance, or spiritual polish, but on your willingness to keep turning back toward the light, again and again, even when you stumbled, even when you were ashamed, even when you believed you had gone too far, and in that turning you discover the truth that ends the accusation forever. Grace was always ahead of you, not behind you, waiting not to condemn you for where you had been, but to welcome you home for daring to return. Point 7, the radiance of the living temple. The final pillar is the realization that you have become a living temple. And this understanding does not arrive with fireworks or spectacle, but with a quiet, irreversible settling of truth into your bones. You no longer search for the divine in distant mountains, hidden knowledge, rituals, or the approval of spiritual authorities, because you have discovered the steady, unmistakable presence of the Creator moving gently within your own breath, your awareness, and your stillness. This is the state of total spiritual sobriety, where illusions fall away, not through force, but through clarity. You are no longer intoxicated by spiritual ambition, identity, or performance. You do not chase signs, titles, or validation. You simply are. As you move through the world, there is an aura of sanctuary around you, subtle but undeniable. Some people feel an unspoken calm when they are near you, as if their nervous system has been given permission to rest. Others feel an unease they cannot explain, not because you are threatening, but because your presence reflects what they have avoided within themselves. Your light does not accuse, it reveals. And revelation is uncomfortable to those still hiding from their own truth. You're no longer trying to do spiritual things, no longer rehearsing wisdom or imitating holiness. You have crossed into embodiment. You have become a spiritual thing, a living expression rather than a seeking mind. This is the moment where victory is finalized, not in celebration, but in permanence. The devil kneels not out of fear or defeat in battle, but out of recognition. He recognizes that you are no longer movable, no longer reactive, and no longer available to manipulation through ego, fear, or illusion. You have become part of the immovable architecture of the heavens, a fixed point of truth that cannot be negotiated with or corrupted. You are a pillar in the temple of God, and a pillar does not wander. A pillar stands, a pillar supports, a pillar holds weight without complaint or collapse. And because of this, you shall go out no more into the illusions of the dark, not because darkness disappears, but because it no longer has authority over your inner world. The shock felt by the divine is not surprise, but joy, the quiet joy of a parent watching a child finally remember their own royal heritage without needing to be reminded again. This is not pride, this is inheritance. You have not become something new. You have returned to what you always were beneath the noise. You made the devil kneel by doing nothing dramatic, nothing violent, and nothing forceful. You simply remembered who you are, and remembrance is the most devastating power to illusion. From this point forward, your life becomes a slow-paced, beautiful meditation, not removed from the world, but fully present within it. You still work, speak, build, and move, but everything flows from alignment rather than striving. Your days carry a quiet, factual truth, calm, grounded, and unmistakably real. You are no longer trying to prove faith, your existence testifies for you. You are no longer rushing toward destiny, you are living inside it. This is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of its true depth. The silent phase where growth is no longer loud and transformation is no longer visible to the untrained eye. You are the chosen one, not because you were selected above others, but because you chose remembrance over forgetting, truth over illusion, and embodiment over performance. And now, having become a living temple, you walk forward not as a seeker, but as a sanctuary, carrying the infinite quietly within you as your journey unfolds into its deepest, most sacred stillness. As we conclude this reflection, carry this stillness with you. You do not need to hurry. You do not need to fear. The victory is not in the future. It is in the quality of your presence right now. Rest in the knowledge that the shadows have seen your light and have acknowledged its source. You are safe. You are whole. You are home. Peace be with your spirit, now and always.